Hello, friends. We have done it. The trade deadline is over, and we are talking. This is No Cap Room. My name is Jake Fischer, senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports. Joining me, as always, senior NBA writer for Yahoo Sports. It is my man. It is your man. It is everyone's man, Dan Devine. How the hell are you?
I'm doing great, Jake. As you know, this is a really high intensity time of year for me. I'm making a lot of calls. I'm working all my sources, doing everything I can to try to get all the information out there. Well, obviously, that's not your responsibility or anything. I'm good, man. How are you? How are you holding up? How's the hydration? How's the sleep been? How have you been doing?
I will say, not a crazy week in terms of sleep. I remember doing this last year with you, our instant reaction pod, staring at the camera and my eyes feeling like they were going to bleed out of my head. I feel good. Like I got a good night's sleep pretty much every night. That was generally due to all the, I'd say, not
You don't have to say more things if you don't want to.
No, I'm just going to say not that crazy. Like we were kind of always saying that this wasn't going to be full of fireworks. And there were some absolute moves that I think really have kind of shifted some of the hierarchies in certain places of the league. But yeah, there was no all-star to change hands today. And there was kind of like a slow rhythm to all of this that I felt personally very manageable. But still, yeah, crazy last finish, trying to figure out stuff, trying to piece together things. But it was fun. I had fun. And I appreciate everyone who's kind of followed our work along the way. How are you doing?
Good. I
already asked you how you're doing, but yeah.
It's all right. We can do this. We'll just do the top of the show over and over again, and everyone won't know anything about what happened. We'll just talk to one another and have a nice conversation. Yeah. I've been working throughout the course of the day on a winners and losers column, and that'll come out later on Yahoo Sports. And there will be a version of it that goes up once, and then a later version with more things because I'm trying to write through it all. But the first part of it is about how nothing was really happening, and then stuff started to happen. I was like, oh shit, I better go try to figure this all out. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. No blockbusters, no gigantic this makes one team the bona fide, no doubt about it favorite, but a lot of teams still had goals to try to accomplish, and some of them got closer to it. And then some of them, I don't really know what the hell they were doing. So maybe we'll pick our way through some of that.
Yeah, we're going to get to the specifics. I just want to do one kind of general overarching verbal essay off the top of the dome right now.
Okay, cool.
Being that I just think that this might be where we're heading under the new CBA. I got to talk to more of the cap nerds around the league about it over the next coming days and honestly weeks. I think there's going to be continuing fallout from, not in terms the only actual fallout transactional wise will be some buyout stuff that we can maybe get to today. Probably not. There's just a lot of stuff to get to, but the more stringent salary matching stuff in the CBA, the fact that the play-in continues to be what it is, the fact that this draft was not very much, it's not just highly regarded amongst talent evaluators were all factors, but it does seem like the CBA and the apron challenges that are coming that are only going to get more challenging with salary matching and aggregation stuff and the mid-level exception stuff. Again, a lot more to eat off that bone moving forward, but I just kind of wanted to say it off the top that we've started to say it before. You're going to keep hearing it come this summer, next trade deadline. Basically, this is a game of poker that all of a sudden has new rules. So all these teams that are trying to bluff and ante up and what have you, they're still kind of figuring them out on the fly. And I do wonder, after certain things that have gone down now and continuing through the next transaction window, we're going to see some adjustments. So I think that's kind of why we saw mostly small things for teams at the top, where you go back to yesterday. Xavier Tillman was someone we'd written about in the past, that he was having extension talks with Memphis, and if nothing was able to have been found there, he was going to get traded to a playoff team for a second-round pick package. Boston was the team I had always heard the most for him, and that was the deal for Lamar Stevens. So they did not use the traded player exception, which I don't think Boston necessarily was absolutely hunting to do, but it got out there, in other reporting that, and mine as well, that they were looking at that tier of move. So I think that got some Celtics fans excited once this deal wasn't into that, maybe Boston can keep going. And I tweeted out this morning that I wasn't expecting there to be anything else from the Celtics. I mean, Jaden Springer for a second is a nice value for a late first round pick guy who's done something, but I don't think Boston's bringing in Jaden Springer thinking he's going to be a key rotation piece for them. So yeah, Dan, as this stands with the Celtics, what do you like about them from where they were earlier in the week?
Yeah, I mean, they profile as a team that got better, but it's like by degrees, which is totally fine when you are already the best team in the NBA, right? You're, 4.5, 5 games clear of second place in the East. Been up and near the top of the league in offensive and defensive efficiency all season. Your top 6 is rock solid. You feel pretty comfortable in your 7, 8, 9 guys where you got Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser and Luke Cornett. So it's a question of, are you going to be able to go get somebody who will bump those guys down in the pecking order, who's better at what you need from those roles than those guys? And Xavier Tillman could be that. He is a versatile center. He's somebody that can defend, 4s and 5s. He was pretty positive player for the Grizzlies during last playoff season. He played significant minutes for them after Steven Adams went out, after Brandon Clark went out. It's not like he's somebody, he can switch on the perimeter. He can play in a drop. He can do a little bit with the ball in his hands offensively. Like he's gonna help if and when they need him, but he's kind of your 4th big, right? Like the goal is like, he is insurance for a front court that has some concerns with Kristaps Porzingis, his injury history, and with Al Horford's age. And, is Luke Cornett somebody that they're going to be able to rely on for big minutes in the playoffs if they need to? All right, well, now they have another option. And that's kind of it. Like when you're already shopping in the high-end aisles like the Celtics are, that's kind of all you're really looking to do. And that, to your point that you mentioned about teams that have already cashed in a lot of their chips, or, we might not be seeing a whole lot of team movement from these teams that are already at the top of the league. Many of them already have. They've already made their big swings, and it's Kristaps Porzingis being there. It's the Derek White move a couple of seasons ago, with the protected first round pick going out there. It's Drew Holiday coming in. Like the Celtics have already cashed in a bunch of chips to build what has been the best team in the league. So you're maybe trying to make some magic on the margins there, and it remains to be seen whether or not Xavier Tillman can be that for them.
I think the Wolves stuff we can keep pretty brief, but Dan
Sure.
had it. Dan had the idea before it came out. Timberwolves, Shake Milton, Troy Brown, their own 2030 second round pick to the Pistons for Monty Morris, a guy that Tim Connolly drafted out of Denver, or when they were in Denver. And he really is like almost a carbon copy of Mike Conley when it comes to high assist to turnover rate. And that's kind of exactly what the Wolves were looking for on this market. I think they were hoping Shake Milton, when they brought him in the summer, could do that and add a little scoring pop. But obviously they were willing to move on for him for more of a higher floor, lower ceiling type guy in Monty Morris. But in this case, the floor is way, way, way higher. You're moving, I don't know how high up the floors of the luxury apartment building in Minnesota, but it's definitely, I think, raising the table that Monty Morris will be able to set.
Wow. Jake, you were working there, my man. You were trying to find the exit ramp on that.
I'm on fumes right now, buddy.
I hear you. This was something that I shouldn't even have said. It was that I mentioned yesterday when it happened that when we were talking about teams on Divine Intervention with Steve Jones Jr. and they teams that we think might make something happen. That was an idea I'd had. Like, I know that they're looking for point guard help. Those salaries line up. I wonder if that the expirings of Shake Milton and Troy Jones Jr., although they're not expiring, Troy Brown Jr. rather, those guys are non-guaranteed for next year. So those effectively expiring salaries and a second round pick, I wondered if that would be enough for Detroit. And I had it in my notes. I was like, oh, I have this in my notes. And then people immediately were like, yeah, right. You just put that down now. Which, like, I'm a sicko and I'm a weird freak. No arguments here. But the idea to clout chase by quickly typing up, this is what it would be. It's incorrect. But also, I deserve some of that scorn for trying to be like, oh, I thought of that, and thinking that was a neat thing that anyone would give a shit about. No one gave a shit about it except for the fact that they could use it to dunk on me. So fair enough. I think Monty Morris could be helpful. I also wonder if he's too small to play in their playoff rotation for a team that's been really huge, but might help them because they all have some trouble with turnovers and with not keeping the offense organized when Conley's off the floor. He's a guy who can do that. Moving on.
The Utah Jazz. So this they did a precursor of a deal to other things yesterday. They had an opportunity for a little Brian Windhorst, Utah, two fingers. Now, what's going on in Utah? Because moving Simone Fontecchio, which, look, for a little while, the Jazz were definitely being characterized as a potential buyer and a seller. Now, they were talked about with Miles Bridges. They talked about DeJounte Murray. They talked about Bruce Brown. They even went back to Charlotte and I think talked about PJ Washington. There was an offer bouncing around the league of John Collins and a first for PJ and Cody Martin. So I heard that. I think that was reported somewhere else. I apologize to not say who had that out there, but I'm just saying I know that to be true now. But instead, the Fontecchio deal indicated more selling for Utah. I had known that Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji were two players of interest to Toronto. We wrote about that Wednesday at Yahoo Sports. Wasn't for Bruce Brown. It was for a first-round pick. So the Jazz, I think all of this is, to me, definitely indicating that Utah is clearing their financial books for a max renegotiation, extend, whatever the actual avenue is for Larry Markkinen. That is my bird's eye view of all the Utah stuff. The Raptors side of this, then they end up trading Dennis Schroeder and Thad Young for Spencer Dinwiddie, who they're just waiving, and he's going to be a whole kit and caboodle of buyout, guy.
I thought you were going to say he's going to be a whole. I was like, damn, that's kind of a harsh noun for Spencer Dinwiddie, but fair enough.
Yeah, the Lakers will be involved. Definitely has interest in going back to Dallas. Could he be a Philly guy? I don't know, but Lakers and Dallas are two teams to keep an eye on for him. So just weird for the Raptors to give up a first for Kelly Olynyk. Sure, if you like Agbaji as well, great. I mean, they're gonna re-sign Olynyk. He's an expiring contract. From everything I've heard,
and he's Canadian.
From everything I've heard, I mean, that's not a coincidence. I think that they are going to be absolutely bringing him back, and it's just to send out a first 2 years in a row for a center is interesting for Toronto, and to not get any real things back for Dennis, who's not to say he was like a massive value piece on the board right now. It's just interesting. So I don't know. I'm going to stop talking. Any thoughts on Utah and Toronto, Dan?
The Jazz part is interesting to me because this is the second year in a row where they were like in a play-in spot at the deadline, and then we're like, yoink. And so like you trade your starting small forward and maybe the best passer on your team, like a pretty good reserve big who helps you play that 5-out style you like so much, for Kevin Knox and Kyra Lewis Jr. and some flexibility, essentially. Which is fine. I mean, fine. Like we know that Danny Ainge is like the mandate from ownership and the way he's approached this job is not to build the scrappiest, most interesting offensive weirdo YouTube video tutorial on how they run their scheme team in the West. It's to try to figure out how to build like a championship caliber team, and like that was tearing it down to the studs and getting a ton of assets and building from there. And if we're competitive in the meantime, great. It's interesting to me that like they're very quickly pulling the ripcord on Ochai Agbaji. I mean, he hasn't shown a heck of a lot this season in the minutes that they've gotten. And then maybe they're just higher on the new group of guys coming in behind him, whether that's Taylor Hendricks, who's spent most of the season in the G League, I believe, and Bryce Sensabaugh, first rounder that they had there. Like maybe they just sort of see that that's like if it was the essentially like trading a first round pick without actually trading a first round pick, and kind of the cost of doing business to, as you mentioned, create more flexibility and sort of open up more minutes for some of those other guys they want to take a longer look at. That makes some sense. But yeah, it's like a quiet winner of that is maybe the Warriors, because they're a game back of Utah
Houston
in
too.
the play-in picture, and Utah just kind of made a conscious effort to shed a couple of good guys, and we'll see. Perhaps this is me poor mouthing Kevin Knox. I don't mean to be disrespectful in that way. And then the Raptors, yeah, I got to look at the kind of the whole transaction structure, because there's part of me that just thinks like these are the wages to some degree of what the waiting for too long on Siakam and waiting for too long on Anunoby. And then you're in this position where you're like, so what kind of team are we trying to build? And obviously they've been pretty terrible since the first few games they've had of the Barrett and Quickly era. We know they've got an all-star in Scotty Barnes. We know that they're going to build around Quickly and Barnes and Barrett and now theoretically Olynyk. But then how does that square with Jakob Poeltl? As you mentioned, they traded a first-round pick to get him, and then they paid him last year. So it's the question of how it's all lining up. And then you don't move Bruce Brown. You don't move Chris Boucher, who I believe is going to be coming off the books this summer as well. So there's a question of just how do all the moves interact, and what are we trying to create out of this, new structure? I'm not sure I see it, but I think Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, that crew, are in an interesting position because they won a championship, but that championship is getting further and further into the rearview mirror. And I think there's a little bit more sort of uncertainty as to what how long the leash is, and or at least how long the honeymoon is for guys that delivered that championship, but then have made a lot of decisions that have left people sort of scratching their heads since. So yeah, I'm not sure which way the Raptors are going. The Jazz appear to have a clear direction, but that might not be toward the postseason this season.
Let's kind of loop in Philly, Indy, and Milwaukee all together because
okay.
First, I'm going to say really sharp maneuvering from Indiana. And we kind of talked about this back at the in-season tournament. I'm just going to let it all out. Let it all hang loose. Before the Pacers traded for Tyrese Halliburton, there was legitimate smoke around the league that the front office there was in trouble. Since then, they go out and get Tyrese. They go out and get, they make the invented Bruce Brown move turn that into Pascal Siakam. Now, after giving Buddy Hield what I know to be, I don't know the exact numbers off top of mind, but what people around the league viewed as like a reasonable extension, they then send him to Philly for 3 seconds. They wanted a first, but they get 3 seconds and Marcus Morris's salary. Then they take Marcus Morris's salary and a second and just get back Doug McDermott, who will be just as valuable, a little bit different than Buddy as a shooter. But if you wanted a flamethrower to replace him, pretty good work by Indy there, I'd say, in just taking that return back and getting another slot in replacement right there. The Pacers are, I think, still just as scary as any team, not the Celtics and not the New York Knicks, which we'll get to coming down the pipe. Philly, they definitely had other aspirations. We wrote about Buddy and Bojan Bogdanovic, I believe, on Tuesday night, and that they were looking to turn some future stuff. They were looking to do what Dallas did, which we'll get to work with OKC to get a future pick to send somewhere else. Didn't happen. Philly was also looking at Andre Drummond. Didn't happen. But they get Buddy Hield, who has been a future Sixer forever. Shout out, as always, to the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast, guys. But sad for the Rights to Ricky Sanchez guys. Sad for Michael Levin in particular. Jaden Springer out the door, like we mentioned at the top with Boston. I think Philly, by their moves and by the early word, is definitely banking on buyout guys to help them. The loudest name, which has been the loudest name ever since Kyle Lowry got traded to Charlotte, has been Kyle Lowry. Philadelphia, local, of course, Villanova product, played for Nick Nurse in Toronto, played for Daryl Morey in Houston. A lot of synergy there. I think Philly gets a general solid grade, but because a lot of their lack of, they're too, it was described to me as, and I think it's been reported kind of various places, their top two center options to kind of plug this hole for Joel Embiid's absence, which, again, the Sixers absolutely are operating under the assumption he's coming back sometime in March, sometime before April. So they were looking for a center just to kind of hold that line before he comes back and then potentially be a backup moving forward. It's not their fault if Chicago just decides to not sell off their guys for the third straight year or whatever it is. And ultimately, Kelly Olynyk got moved for a first. I don't think the Sixers are moving a first for him. So there's a lot now riding on Mo Bamba and Paul Reed over these next 6 to 8 weeks, whatever it ends up being. And I don't know how much Buddy Hield is going to be raising everything there until the big guy comes back.
Yeah, I was going to say big winner, B-ball Paul, like undisputed champion of the backup point guard spot. Now, interim starting center. There's a lot to like there. Yeah, the Philly. It's interesting to me. Your point about the Sixers continuing to operate under the belief that Embiid's going to be back like mid-March, or thereabouts. Like he will be back for the playoff run. You do not move everything for an expiring a shooter on an expiring contract unless you have faith that that guy is going to work with the center that you have that is like the sun and everything else orbits. And Hield can be a pretty, great moon in that context, right? He feels like a guy where the level of off-ball movement shooter the Sixers have not had since JJ Redick, and the kind of who we know had like a monstrous connection with Embiid in the two-man game, the dribble handoff game, all that kind of stuff. We also know that Hield has been, especially this season, with the way he works with Halliburton, as like an inverted pick and roll operator. Like he can screen and flare and create off of that. He was doing that with Siakam during the brief period that they were together in Indiana. And super high volume shooter, super high accuracy shooter, somebody that can do it off the catch or off the move. He can pull like that. There's a lot to like there. Obviously, the defensive concerns have trailed him throughout his career and is one reason why he's, despite being that level of shooter, has played for so many teams. But I like the idea of you're getting a look at him during this period where Philly's having a real hard time scoring with Embiid out and with so much of a creative burden on Maxey. He's somebody else that his gravity draws defensive attention and can maybe make some things easier. And then the idea of more shooting around Embiid. The Sixers, even though they've been a very good offensive team for most of the season, down near the bottom of the league in the share of their shots that come from three-point range, three-point shot attempts per game, team three-point accuracy. A knockdown shooter like Hield can really open things up for them. And I feel like would be as an absolute weapon playing off of Embiid and off of Tyrese Maxey. So to be able to get him without dealing from your rotation, without dealing from your stock of first round picks, continuing to have the flexibility there. And again, I believe an expiring contract that, still maintains the financial flexibility that Daryl Morey and company are looking to maintain heading into the summer. It's a ton to like there. As everything else, so much of it depends on whether Embiid gets back, when he gets back, and how he looks when he gets there. But this, if nothing else, represents a vote of confidence in that regard. And then, for Indy, I think the other part of it that we didn't mention is in terms of yes, you have Doug McDermott kind of coming in to serve as the replacement for Buddy Hield. It also, but he's a little bit more of a small forward than as like a bigger player, a little bit more of a 3 than a 2. And the Pacers, they like Benedict Mathurin, right? They like Andrew Nembhard. They like Ben Shepherd, who they drafted in the first round this past year. They've got these guys that are, combo guards, or they need to play at the 2. And this could create some more pathways to minutes and opportunities for them as well. So it's a vote of confidence, it seems like, at least in those young guards that they've gotten these last couple of drafts to go along with Halliburton, to go along with McDermott and Siakam and the rest of the infrastructure there. Miles Turner as a stretch 5 who opens up so much. So I think it'll be interesting to see, we understand how transformative an offensive player Tyrese Halliburton is. And I think we attribute a lot of, nearly all of, what Indiana has been able to turn into on the offensive end to him. Hield has been there the whole time, and Tyrese Halliburton has been very vocal about how important a player Hield has been with the quickness of his shot, with the gravity that he has moving around the court. I think it'll be interesting to see how the Pacers offense adjusts from there. And then if the team finds a little bit better balance, if you're playing more guards and wings that are maybe better at the point of attack defensively than Hield has been, guys that you don't have to hunt or that are not as easy to hunt. I think it'll be interesting to see how the Pacers rebalance. But yeah, a team that's in the play-in mix squarely and that is looking, it's funny that to have them make a deal with a team that they're directly behind in the standings right now, because it sort of makes sense for both sides. But it could also wind up benefiting both teams as they try to move forward in playoff positioning in the 5-6 spot. So a lot to pay attention to there.
The Sixers got campaign back from Milwaukee in the Patrick Beverley trade to the Milwaukee Bucks, which campaign might have a flamethrower moment or two for Philly down the stretch here, as they have been, who knows, call out or not, they could use more guys who can dribble and put pressure on defenses. So I don't think he's he's someone to mention as a return for Philadelphia in this. the Bucks
He's
side
someone
of it,
to mention.
yeah, I just think campaign has been like tossed around from contender to contender, but like he's still going from contender to contender, you know? Like let's
Sure.
give campaign his flowers, I guess. I'll say the Bucks side of it though, like sure, point of attack defense is something that a lot of people have been pointing to as a real opening on their depth chart. And Pat Bev can hound a bunch of guys across both 1 and 2 spots. I just thought that they were looking for more of a, I don't know, someone who could fill more holes than Patrick Beverley. Someone who could guard across multiple positions, someone who might even be a bit younger and maybe even on a longer term deal, being that they're a team that, as evidenced by their return only being Patrick Beverley, already has limited assets. But look, like Dorian Finney-Smith did not get moved. Seems pretty clear that Brooklyn was not moving him for anything less than first round pick. You know, I'd heard Najee Marshall. Like Najee Marshall, I mean, it takes 2 to tango. I don't know if that would have been, but even like I'd heard Chris Dunn from Utah, like I tweeted out. Again, I don't know if the cost would have been as low, but I think there probably were options. I mean, the last person I talked to with Milwaukee about all their stuff before all the hit the fan today was them joking, saying, yeah, there's 70 names on our whiteboard. So, and we'd heard dozens. So I'm just kind of like, Pat Bev. But that's no shade of Pat Bev. I think he is still very much a useful contributor and was all year in Philly. I just think that he's not exactly what I would have wanted if I was someone in the Bucks front office.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right to point out you don't necessarily get to shop wherever you want when the assets you bring to bear are like at best Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and the Blazers 2024 second round pick, right? Like that could get you into some conversations, but it didn't, right? Or those conversations didn't get where they wanted to go. So like if you want a big switchable wing who can hit threes and guard 4 positions, like, all right, yeah, you need a first for that, buddy. Like that's kind of what needs to happen. Yeah. And so you shop at a lower price point, and Pat Bev could be helpful there. And it's something I was talking to when I talked to Steve Jones Jr. on Divine Intervention this week. We were talking about where the Bucks were. Like, it's possible that low-hanging fruit, basic stuff gets them to like stable defensively. Like, don't be the worst transition defense in the league. Don't aggressively overhelp 40 feet from the rim. Do more sort of basic drop back, simple help stuff. Rely on Brook and Giannis to clean it up. And maybe, Doc doesn't seem particularly eager to play, your Andre Jackson Jr.'s or, Marjan Beauchamps. Like those guys seem like they've kind of run out of leash pretty quickly. But yeah, if Pat Bev's a little bit better at the point of attack, that, then that helps. So yeah, it's possible that they're even a minor adjustment still, with the other sort of more structural changes, everything winds up being fine there. But yeah, I would imagine that they, John Horst, we know, has been aggressive and has been somebody who's looked to make bigger additions in years past. Yeah. They just, you do that year over year and the cupboard winds up running pretty bare.
Being told we only have 10 minutes left to record. So let's move this quick. Dallas, they get Daniel Gafford. They get PJ Washington. They send out 2 firsts. Like we were saying, they didn't manufacture another one. Seems like at first blush, I will have to do more analysis after conversations, but just so far from what I've understood, it seems like the sticker shock a little bit high, being that they just acquired Grant in a sign and trade this summer, had to use a first to get off of it, even though they get PJ Washington, a guy with longer term money and what have you, or same 4 years, but I don't know. It's just, I don't think the Mavericks made themselves really much closer to the gap, or close the gap so much with the top tier teams, the Clippers, the Wolves, Denver, OKC. With all this, I think they will definitely be better. They have a real full team. They've got real actual power forwards now and stuff. But I don't know. To me, like, they still more of like, I never really was told that things with Golden State got far along for Wiggins, but someone like him with real actual wingy shooting, I thought made more, like a 3-4, I thought made more sense than a 4-5. and Dallas got 2 of the 4-5s instead of one of those guys. So it's a big bet on Josh Green, basically, I think.
Which could pan out. I mean, there's a lot. He's got a lot of fans around the league. PJ Washington feels like a do-over on the Grant Williams signing. Like they thought that was going to pan out in one direction and it didn't. And so if PJ Washington can provide essentially what they hoped Grant Williams would, then, you're in a better position if you're Dallas. Daniel Gafford is kind of similar-ish to Derek Lively in that, screen and roll rim protector. So if nothing else, you kind of play the same way all 48 minutes and you've got 2 starting caliber bigs to do that. That's nice. Rashawn Holmes wasn't really doing a whole heck of a lot for Dallas. So that's an upgrade in terms of your backup 5 spot. I think that where you run into problems, and we'll have to sort of see how it goes, but there's the asset chain there, like what you gave up to get Grant Williams in the sign and trade, the multiple picks out the door, the other assets, and then you move off of him, and then you also move a pick to go get Daniel Gafford. Like we are running now out a team that was already pretty light on assets in terms of draft capital around Luka Doncic and had already put a bunch out the door to get Kyrie. You're getting, even sort of it's thinning out even more. So they need this to be good now, and a lot of that, obviously, all of it's going to depend on what Kyrie and Luka can do. Hopefully, this makes their lives a little bit easier, and that fortifies that defense enough for their offense to play up in a short series. Because I don't think anybody really still wants to deal with Luka in a short series, provided they get there.
We can hit 3 teams quickly. Charlotte, they did not want to move Miles Bridges for anything less than a first, and once that reality sunk in Phoenix, it was always positioned to me that their number 2 option behind Bridges was Royce O'Neal. So the Suns got him for what ended up being 3 seconds, and it made it into a 3-team deal. The fact that Nasir Little's deal didn't get moved in this at all, I think showcases that Brooklyn was very concerned about maintaining future flexibility in all this. And they only took back, I believe, Jordan Goodwin and Chimezie Metu were heading there. I still have to sift through all the terms, but I don't think they took anyone that has any real long-term salary. There could be some player option stuff depending on, I'm not so familiar with the contracts right now, but just it's not a 4-year deal with long-term money on it, that Nasir Little's deal. So I'm just using that as like a glimpse into Brooklyn's thinking, especially the fact that they traded Spencer Dinwiddie. I mean, Dennis does have more long-term money, but I think Brooklyn is still valuing optionality moving forward here. Charlotte, yesterday I had heard that Gordon Hayward to OKC was something to keep an eye on. For the entire portion of all this, while teams were lining up for him as a potential buyout, it was always made clear that Gordon Hayward did not want to take a buyout, so now he doesn't have to. He goes to OKC, where his injury questions don't really matter for the Thunder, because if he doesn't play, so what? He's an expiring deal. And if he does, they still have his bird rights. So all this to say, we need to talk about the Knicks. Dan Devine's New York Knicks. I had heard, and I tweeted out early Thursday morning, that both Philadelphia and New York were trying to acquire both Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic. For Detroit, they wanted Tobias Harris. Anything with Philly did not want to move Tobias Harris, to my knowledge. And Quentin Grimes, as much as I don't think he is by himself like the banner item that I think Detroit was really looking for when you go back to last trade deadline with Bojan Bogdanovic, the Knicks found a way to get Bojan and Alec Burks without giving up a first-round pick, and they didn't give up a first-round pick for OG Anunoby. Hell of a trade deadline for Leon Rose's front office. Really, really, really impressive work, getting better. And it seems like at the Garden right now, the Knicks might be the greatest threat to Boston in the Eastern Conference. Are you buying that, or are you selling that, Dan Devine?
I'm selling that because the Knicks don't have the Giannis or Embiid, they don't have that. So I'm reluctant to say that they're like the no doubt
right
number. No, they're not. The Cavs are. But
sorry.
I'm not saying that. So I'm reluctant to say that. But I will say, if you, in the absence of that guy, this is about as good as you can do to build the team, right? Where you are just rock solid, like 9 deep with guys that can play everywhere. And I was kind of hoping for Bruce Brown. I think we had talked about that, the idea of even if he is somewhat duplicative of maybe a guy like Josh Hart or a guy like Dante DiVincenzo, although now that Dante DiVincenzo is shooting like Steph Curry, maybe not. So, maybe they're different kind of players, but the idea of like another sort of 6'4" combo guard who can do a little bit with the ball, shoot a little bit, defend multiple positions, whatever. I kind of liked the idea of stacking those guys because it would make you as uncomfortable as possible to play against in a postseason series. But the recent devolution of the Knicks roster into like an intensive care ward suggested that they needed some actual NBA bodies to play more actual NBA minutes now. And Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks are that for sure. And so Bojan Bogdanovic can be, if Tibbs wants to put him in the starting lineup, he's a guy that was averaging 20 a game on like 41% shooting from three in Detroit. He can play, he's a legit 6'8", can play either forward spot depending on how Tibbs wants to do it. When the Knicks get Julius Randle and OG Anunoby back from their respective injuries, he goes to the bench. He is somebody who can be like overqualified as a, first or second option off the bench. The big rebalancing that the Knicks dealt with after the Anunoby trade was they no longer had Emmanuel Quickley to run the second unit. They could no longer have Quickley and RJ Barrett as like guys who picked up the pace and created more shots for when Jalen Brunson or Julius Randle were off the court. Alec Burks now steps in to do more of that. He's a guy who can play on the ball or off of it as a shooter. He's, big, has, I think like 6'6", has wing size, somebody that the Knicks, Tibbs loves, and he's willing to put out there defensively. He trusts him. So they were, again, I mentioned this earlier with Philly, like you're able to make this kind of deal without dealing out of your rotation, without dealing out of your stock of first round picks. And then the financial component to it as well, you move Quentin Grimes, which hurts, but again, was perhaps somewhat duplicative of the other guys they brought in. Like Hart went over him in the rotation. Dante DiVincenzo went over him in the rotation. And you move the Evan Fournier expiring contract, but you bring in a big $10.5 million expiring contract in Alec Burks and the Bojan Bogdanovic, who is on I think a $20 million deal this year, owed $19 million next year, but only $2 million of that's guaranteed. So if the Knicks want to have that, preserve that matching salary for a big deal if it comes up, guarantee that $19 million, you can throw it into a deal, or just like if it works and you like the player, guarantee the $19 million, bring him back, keep him in your rotation. So it preserves the optionality, the flexibility, and bolsters your immediate lineup now. Josh Hart had made a joke on Twitter earlier today, was like, I hope get those guys on the private jet and get them to the arena tonight. Like, I need to not be averaging 40 minutes a game every night.
They play Dallas tonight.
And I doubt that they're going to be cleared for that. But like, the Knicks desperately need bodies. These guys should help. And it's like all of the goals that the Knicks had contractually, asset management wise, whatever, those are all they're still on pace to achieve them. Obviously, the $1 million question is, who is the big guy that you would go make that big swing trade for? Is there a star that's going to come available? Who knows? But the Knicks have maintained the ability to get into that conversation later while making what is a top 4 seed in the East better today. And that is a difficult thing that's a tough needle to thread. And the Knicks appear to have done it. So, they bolster what they have getting into the All-Star break. Theoretically, they get Julius Randle, OG Anunoby, Mitchell Robinson back. And then you're talking about an awfully deep team with a lot of different kinds of weapons that can play a lot of different kinds of ways. This is on paper the best Knicks team since Jeff Van Gundy. And we'll have to see how far they can go.
Lakers don't do anything. Golden State doesn't do anything outside of trading Corey Joseph to the Pacers. The Bulls stand pat. Miles Bridges stays. DeJounte Murray not traded. The Blazers don't move Malcolm Brogdon or Jeremy Grant. The Kings don't do anything. We'll have a lot more on the teams that held pat, things that could have happened, and what the leftover pieces on the board will say for what's to come this summer. And whatever we write on Yahoo Sports today through the weekend next week. But for now, thank you all for listening. Thank you to John Gennaro, super producer who does all the things to make the show look and sound great. Subscribe to Ball Don't Lie on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you are currently listening on, and leave us a 5-star review. That would be great. We thank you for listening, and we'd appreciate it if you came back again next week for another episode of No Cap Room.